Thank you so much, Jed. Too many thrills here. Sharing the stage with Mr. Rogers and finding out that I make meetings fun. Holy cow. I wonder if I was at those same meetings, Jed. Good afternoon. It's really my great honor to be here with you today and allow me to lend my welcome to those you've already received. I'd like to start with a poem that I'll get to in a moment. And I was asked to write it for Veterans Day 2012. Working with, as poet laureate, I have declared a signature project, apart from going to hospitals and shelters and schools and colleges and universities, Girl Scout packs, you name it. I'm working with returning combat veterans, all veterans really, and their families to harvest their wartime stories through poems and other kinds of writing. So I was asked again to write a poem for Veterans Day, and I thought about this. I don't know a heck of a lot about really what it means to be a veteran or a soldier, although I know a lot more now, a year into it. I was doing some research, and I have spent a good bit of time in Fayetteville as a result of some of these assignments. And I found out that at Fort Bragg, which is 251 square miles, there's a 10 by 10 kilometer patch, that's about 6 miles by 6 miles, in which an endangered species of butterfly lives. And there's nowhere else in the whole world except in this 6 mile by 6 mile patch. And it also has chosen, for some reason, high artillery impact zones where the soldiers train. So it's completely miraculous and inexplicable, again, that this delicate little butterfly lives and lives nowhere else anywhere. So I think that poem and the story I just told you behind it illustrate not only the mystery and fragility of nature, but also its unfathomable resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable calamity, all of which, to my mind, is tied inextricably to our discussion about energy and the practice of sustainability. What's more, the flourish of a poem to launch things is always the right touch, akin to a benediction. And I also want to underscore that the topics which this summit is convened to discuss are cross-curricular in their very essence. A pressing agenda that must necessarily be taken up as well by the arts, humanities, and social sciences alongside the sciences and technology. The power of the arts, humanities, and social sciences to evangelize is indisputable. And of course, I teach in the English department. Philosopher and theologian Thomas More stresses that deep changes in life follow movements in imagination. Imagination on this campus and on each of the UNC campuses, and I've visited all of them, is in ample supply among faculty, staff, and students alike, with vigorous support and leadership from the various administrations. The quest to enhance the life of the planet and its citizenry must always be rooted in the imaginative and always be collaborative. The poem is called St. Francis's Satyr Butterfly. That's what this little butterfly is called. And it does have an epigraph, and the epigraph is, all creatures have the same source as we have, from St. Francis of Assisi. A reclusive small brown butterfly, white and yellow stigmatic suns deployed along its wing ridges. St. Francis's satyr, christened after the 12th century Italian soldier and POW turned mystic, secretes itself miraculously in 10 by 10 kilometers of the 251 square mile brash of Fort Bragg, exact coordinates classified, beyond which we know this much: it has gone undetected. Shy, endangered, preferring anonymity, it hides in high artillery impact domains. Life often chooses death, the fires triggered by bombardment. It wears marsh camouflage, resembles in its favorite habitat blasted sedge and beaver ruins, a tiny standard issue advanced combat helmet. Parts from the chrysalis, rent too soon from its dream of living, the satyr blazes in desperate glory, but 3 or 4 days in its imaginal stage, then tenders its life in rich sacrifice. Its gorgeous numbers dwindle. The caterpillar has never been seen. We accept on faith metamorphosis. Now, let me beam you all back over 43 years ago when I was 16 years old, a high school junior, and the first Earth Day was celebrated on April 22nd, 1970. Its promises, sweeping and revolutionary, inaugurated what would become the environment movement. That very first Earth Day, 1970, dovetailed into the revolutionary consciousness streaming through the United States, harnessing the energies of the anti-war, women's, and black power movements. It placed the plight of the environment squarely before the American public. It led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Clean Air, Clean Water, and Endangered Species Act. I'm not sure if prior to that first Earth Day, in the 4+ decades that have followed, that I had ever considered the word environment, though I was keenly aware of place. And that place was Pittsburgh, the city I grew up in, a city perhaps more than any other 20th century American city renowned for its grit and gray, its toxic, unbreathable air, an indictment that still dogs it, though it's been for years a shimmering city, cleaned up after its legendary chief industry steel failed. Indeed, in many neighborhoods, when I was growing up, the streetlights had to be turned on mid-afternoon for the sake of visibility. It was that bad. Air pollution, another word that began to inch into our daily vocabulary in the 60s, was a fact of life in heavily industrialized America. Things began to change, however, with the late 1962 publication of Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson, a Pittsburgh native. A withering indictment, chapter and verse, of how the natural world was atrophying at an alarming, even fatal rate. The book, a bestseller, sold 500,000 copies, was a Book of the Month Club selection, and is dedicated to Albert Schweitzer. Today it is a classic, standing at the top of the canon of environmental literature, and it is still being taught on this campus, in fact, in our cutting-edge sustainable development curriculum. I have it with me, the 75-cent Crest book paperback, published in 1964, that belonged to my sister Marie, who was 14 when she first read this book. Prescient and precocious as always, the first thing she has underlined neatly in pencil is, only within the moment of time represented by the current century has one species, man, acquired significant power to alter the nature of his world. That century, the 20th, is spilled into this next, the futuristic 21st. And we know that in dark, but also terrifically brilliant, sustainable ways, we do have the power to alter our world. And we are doing just that in visionary ways on this campus and on the rest of the UNC campuses. However, it is news to no one that the initial fervor of Silent Spring, whose message remains ever crucial this minute, along with the thrust of that very first Earth Day, rioted, then slid and slumped and lost traction. The explosive bestseller the whole world is talking about, the cover of Marie's worn copy announces in all caps, but relatively soon, apparently, folks stopped talking about it. I imagine back then, not quite a year after Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, that come 2013, I'd be living in a completely different world. The fictional future our fledgling utopia of 1970 aimed to chart. If you were old enough to recall, the concept of not littering was wholly unique, totally astonishing. Indeed, all of the covenants were not kept, were they ever? But many of them were and continue to be. And of course, like you, I am living in a completely different world, one, as it often is, at a crossroads. And I am not here to wring my hands over what we have not accomplished, but rather to champion what we have accomplished and what we have yet ahead of us. In the over half century since Silent Spring blazed into the American consciousness and then perhaps blazed out, though the pilot light remains forever ignited, the scholarship that has emerged to link arms with Carson's charge is staggering. We know what we must do. Our path is clear. The task is urgent. But I don't wish to merely regurgitate pamphlets. Wendell Berry, fire-breathing Kentucky farmer, poet, environmentalist, theologian, states in his essay, Getting Along with Nature, in the hereafter, the Lord may forgive our wrongs against nature, but on earth, so far as we know, he does not overturn her decisions. It's been my pleasure over this past academic year to be a member of ASU's Strategic Planning Committee and work on the mission and vision statements. While those texts are still in draft, embedded in them is what we term our cultural, historical, and natural learning environment, inspired by the ideal of sustainable community. Inseparable from this philosophy, in its language, is the aspiration towards transformation, which we can only achieve in truth by the kinds of real transformation, not merely rhetorical, that this energy summit signals. It's especially important to note that the word environment appears prominently in drafts of both our vision and mission statements. What's more, to quote Jed Moody, we have the goal to save the state more than $1 billion in savings over the next 20 years. Through ongoing energy savings activities, the UNC system saved $67 million last fiscal year, and we see the potential for that number to grow. That, as well, is not merely rhetoric. This second Appalachian Energy Summit, like the very first, here at Appalachian State University, in the mountains we love so passionately, is another take on Earth Day. We actually have a website called zerowaste.appstate.edu. That's not merely rhetorical either. It's happening, and we pledge that's only the beginning. As I began, I'll close with a poem and let nature have the last word, as it undoubtedly will in any event. This is a poem called The Woods Behind the Tenant Shack, and it has an epigraph from the theologian Thomas Merton from his book, The Sign of Jonah. It is important to realize where you are put on the face of the earth. The tenant shack faces east. From its splintered porch, I can see Mount Zion's white steeple rising from the frozen plow soles. No one remembers who lived here, only whose crop was tended. Hail pings off the corrugated roof and rakes the glade above gullies where beds have swollen and dried, swallowing fences now no more than brittle strings to walk across. We head south for the confluence of boulders, theories of map and compass delicately balanced between us. Jersey puts brown eye to the wind, and with his ounce of husky blood paws the first fork of Cedar Creek, silvered in blades of ice. Its banks are shaved, pocked with moonstone and muscovite. Morels push out around ferns and crusted moss on the white root weir. I plunge into a wall, black stumps and broken bricks, begin to climb, disquieted by whispers and freezing apparitions, tricked again and again by the cedar's serpentine branches. It is the ruse of fear to hook a man, build a wall between him and God, name him lost when he is somewhere in Anson County, night falling with a black dog on the trail of a hermit thrush. I hear a whistle from the old Willoughby trestle as a freighter packed with dead wood reckons its milestone and hurtles through a world of forgetfulness. Thank you very much.